Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session on how to become a MongoDB DBA, especially if you are really a MySQL user. That's kind of the twist of the session today. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Jean-Jérôme, and I'll be looking after you for the next 60 minutes or so. And my colleague Art van Scheppingen is going to be presenting and doing a live demo for you today on this topic. Just before we get started, I wanted to run you through a few logistics. First of all, to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you actually tomorrow. So it'll be online tomorrow, and we'll send out an email with information on how to get to the recording on Thursday as well. So you have the information then, if you want to rewatch the session at your own time. But it's great to have you with us now for this live event. If you have any questions during the next hour or so, feel free to ask them in the question section of your control panel, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. And in addition, if you would like to contact us after the webinar, feel free to email us at info@several9s.com, and we'll be happy as well, of course, to continue the conversation with you via email as well. So that's it in terms of the logistics. And before we get started with the actual session, I wanted to ask all of you in the audience today a quick question. And this is really to understand whether you are already a MongoDB user or whether you are a MySQL user who's interested in MongoDB. Or maybe you actually work with a mix of open source databases. So it'd be great to get your feedback here on what your database landscape looks like today, and that'll give us a good idea of how to position the conversation for the next 60 minutes as well. So I give this a few seconds for everyone to participate, and thank you for taking the time to do that, of course. I'm just going to, I think I can close this now, and I'll share the results. Right, so but exactly 80% of you are MySQL users looking into MongoDB, which is great because that's pretty much how we're positioning the talk today. But it's also good to see some of you who are MongoDB users only, and then the other section of you are using a mixed sort of environment of open source databases, which is good to see as well. So this is exactly, I think, the audience we wanted to talk to today. So thank you for joining us and for participating today. And with this, I'll hand over to my colleague Art, who is going to walk us through the actual presentation. Over to you, Art.
Thank you, JJ. So the agenda for today is, first of all, we're going to talk a bit about what it is to become a MongoDB DBA for MySQL DBAs. So that's a short introduction. What are the great differences between MongoDB and MySQL? Then we'll move into deployment of MongoDB, how you can install and configure MongoDB, and what are the things you need to take into account. We'll dive into the monitoring part. What are the most important things to look at? How should you look at it? How should you monitor it? And then we'll move into performing backups and what kind of backups you can make, what kind of tools are out there. And then in the end, there's a live demo of cluster control and how you can use cluster control for your own benefit to do the deployment, configuration, management of MongoDB. So first of all, we're going to do one step back. Why do you want to install MongoDB? And I think a lot of the MySQL DBAs out there are asking this question: why does this developer need MongoDB? Why did this project manager choose MongoDB? Well, it can be simply answered by not everyone is equally happy with SQL or MySQL. There is obviously the SQL and NoSQL camps that are fighting against each other for the past 5-6 years. But you have to take into account that MySQL isn't just suitable for anything anything outside SQL. So if you have different storage needs, like for instance with JSON blobs or recommendation engines, you are outside the MySQL scope already. And that also leads to issues in your deployment chain where you are only capable of deploying, let's say, a MySQL database. And you all of a sudden need to install alternative data storage engines. And you move into what we call Polyglot Persistence. And I'll dive into the Polyglot Persistence with this example. The example is quite simple. Does a carpenter only use one tool? Well, as a carpenter, I can use the tool to hammer in nails into the wood, or I can extract them with the rear of the hammer. But I can also use this hammer to hammer in screws, or I can try to chop some wood using the rear end of the hammer. But it's not really meant for that. And a carpenter actually uses a lot of different tools because he needs to perform all sorts of different actions. And this analogy can be applied to MySQL or actually to databases. So for databases, we actually have many different flavors of databases. If you look at the total landscape of let's say a simple company that is using service-oriented architecture, and they have a couple of APIs that they expose to their web application, and they expose, for instance, a login microservice, some profile storage, billing service, and a recommendation service. But they're using MySQL as the backend storage system, and that also means that they're only using one storage system behind all these services. But MySQL isn't really suitable for a recommendation engine running Scala. Scala really needs to read a lot of data and then write the output to somewhere where it can extract it really quickly. Same goes for billing. You really want to ensure that all your billing information is always 100% accurate. So you want to have asset compliance. So that also leads to a different landscape where we're using different storage engines for what they're actually meant for. So Hadoop for the recommendation service, Postgres for the billing service, MongoDB for profile service because you're doing document storage. And that also leads to a diverse landscape where you have many different databases in your topology, in your infrastructure. And you also need to manage this. So now we have determined that we actually are going to use MongoDB in our environment. And maybe we should first look at how different MongoDB is from MySQL. Well, the most obvious part is that it's a document store. It stores JSON objects. And because it's storing in JSON format, it also allows you to do flexible schemas. And a flexible schema is basically your table structure that is not defined as strict as in MySQL. So you can easily change columns. You can do them, apply them in different order within the JSON object. And that also leads to certain issues within MongoDB. And we'll dive into that in a later webinar. MongoDB also offers out-of-the-box scaling and sharding, and that's something that is quite unfamiliar for most of us as a MySQL DBA. Running MySQL and running scaling it out or sharding it also means that you have to perform a lot of work to do the scaling and the sharding, and especially sharding can't be done within MySQL unless you're running, for instance, NDB cluster, or you're running some sort of application on top of your database. Another difference from MongoDB is that there's a really enthusiastic development community, and most of the people inside that community are all developers, so they all develop all sorts of small tools that can help you with MySQL. So it's a bit different where MySQL tools are mainly created by larger companies and shared by larger companies. There's a really enthusiastic community exposing all sorts of tools for MongoDB. So you also have a big tool set that you can pick and choose from. Another difference between MySQL and MongoDB is the eventual consistency. Within MongoDB, you can replicate from from the primary to the secondary node. So that's basically similar to master and slave nodes. However, MySQL has either asynchronous replication, where you replicate from the master to the slave, or many slaves. And actually, the slave is initiating the replication from the master. In MongoDB, the replication is initiated by the primary node, and the primary node is the one that replicates it to the secondary nodes. It does that in a similar way as Galera does it, but there is a big difference between MongoDB and Galera. Within Galera, you need the quorum, so you need the majority of the votes within your Galera nodes to apply a write. In MongoDB, it's similar, where you are starting to write data to the primary node. It will be applied to the primary node, then replicated to a secondary node, and it doesn't matter which one from the secondary nodes will apply it. And once it has been applied on a secondary node, the response will be sent back to the user that the data has been written. And that also means that other secondary nodes did not receive the write directly from the primary node. And that also means that your Mongo cluster is not in a consistent state. Therefore, it's called eventual consistency. Eventually, it will be consistent. As long as MongoDB can write on a secondary node, according to MongoDB, it will be fine. And somewhere in the future, the whole cluster may be consistent. And that's also something you have to take into account, that the primary and secondary nodes may not be in sync with each other. And also between secondary nodes, some may not have all the transactions. Now, let's go into how similar MongoDB actually is to MySQL, because I just told you a lot of things that are not similar. Well, you still need to do all the database basics. Deployment, management, monitoring, backup, scaling. There are also other things like if you have I/O problems, it's similar to MySQL. MongoDB will suffer from the same issues. So actually, it is less different than you think. You just need to adjust your mindset to MongoDB.